while the older man warned him about the extreme dangers of the cold. The man's pride prompts him to disregard this warning and go out anyways. The man walking through the cold Yukon trails with nothing but a dog at his side, freezing cold, in desperate need to get home to the boys so they can eat lunch together. He was crossing over a frozen river, which he thought he was safe, when all of a sudden, without warning, he fell through. It was not deep, but he was soaked to the knees before he could get out of the water into the snow. So he turned to the bank and climbed. While on top he found several small pine trees and some firewood which had been carried there by the high water of last year. He threw several large branches on top of the snow so he could make a foundation and prevent the young flame from dying in the wet snow. He then made the flame by touching a match to a small piece of tree bark that he took from his pocket. It burned even better than paper. He placed the small piece of bark on the foundation and fed the young flame with pieces of dry grass and the smallest dry sticks. All the man knew was that the old man on Sulphur Creek had told him about it, and he was grateful for the advice. The fire, which was beginning to burn with strength, he was feeding it with sticks the size of his finger, and in another minute he would be able to feed it with larger branches. The fire was a success. He was safe. He remembered the advice of the old man on Sulphur Creek and smiled. The man had been very serious when he said that no man should travel alone in that country after 50 below zero. But the man should not have built the fire under the pine tree. The snow fell without warning upon the man and the fire. The fire was dead. Where it had burned was a pile of fresh snow. The man was shocked. It was like hearing his own judgment of death. The old man on Sulphur Creek was right. He thought in the moment of controlled despair that followed, after 50 below zero, a man should travel with a companion. The man looked at the dog, and a wild idea sprung into his head. Person thought he could kill his dog and bury his hands in the warm body until feeling returned to them. Then he could build another fire. The man sat in the snow for a moment and struggled for calmness. Then he pulled on his mittens using his teeth and then stood on his feet. He looked down at his hands to locate them and found them hanging on the ends of his arms. He began to wave his arms around wildly, beating his mittened hands against his side. A certain fear of death came upon him. The fear made him lose control of himself. He turned and ran along the creek bed of the old trail. Maybe if he ran far enough, he would find the camp and the boys. His idea of running until he arrived at camp and the boys presented one problem. He lacked endurance. Several times he would catch himself falling, and then finally drop to the ground, unable to stop his fall. When he tried to rise again, he only fell. So he stopped and rested. He decided next time he would merely walk and keep going. The thought of him freezing to death came back, and then he lost his mind again. He began to run wildly along the trail. Once again he slowed to a walk, but the thought of the freezing of his body was increasing, and he ran again. And then the man fell for a second time. It was his last moment of fear. When he had recovered enough breath and his control, he sat and thought about meeting death with dignity. He pictured the boys finding his body the next day. His mind went from this to the thought of the old man at Sulphur Creek. He could see him quite clearly, warm and comfortable, and smoking a pipe. The man dropped what seemed to be into a very comfortable sleep, and died. The dog howling at the wind, waiting for the man's response.